Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Matters with me, Dr Audrey Tang. This is the show where we look at all things workplace wellbeing, and we've said it before on this show. Often people think they have one good book inside them. Many people have more than one good book inside them. Many people just simply have a book. But today we are talking to Kelly Thompson. She is a book doula. Now, what this means is, because we've had an editor on the show, we've had a publisher on the show, this is before you get started. This is someone who can help you through the process, who can shape your ideas, who can ask you questions such as, do you really want to include that? How is that contributing value to your book? And this is a conversation that a lot of us do need to have before we start saying, I've got a book and I'm going to just sell it. Let's head over. Kelly, welcome to Mental Health Matters. It's great to have you on the show again.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you, Audrey. Yeah, it's been a while. I'm very glad to be back. Thanks.
And your show on the tsunami, where you talked us through your experiences, is our highest rated show. It's the one
God.
that,
wow.
which
I didn't know that.
Your reflections, I think, really resonated with a lot of people, and your growth and resilience and rebuilding and healing, I think, is something that everybody really connected with. So thank you again for sharing that.
Thanks for saying that. Oh no, I'm going to start crying before I even talk. In a good way. In a good way, I mean, because it's lovely to hear when these things touch people, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, we are going to be talking about something slightly different today, but do go and watch Kelly's show on the December 26th tsunami. We did it on the commemoration of the day 20 years on, so do watch that. But today, Kelly, you're talking to us about your work, and you are a book doula. Now, this is not a phrase I would normally use. So for those of us who don't know, what is a book doula?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important place to start. Otherwise, no one knows what we're talking about. It's not a term that everyone knows for a start. It's not like an inside publishing term or anything. It's just that I worked in nonfiction publishing for over 25 years, both in-house as an editor and a commissioning editor, and also as a freelancer in various capacities and co-writing with people and book doctoring and book development and every aspect of helping people with their text. And my most recent in-house role had been as a commissioning editor for Watkins Publishing. Now that's about 8 years ago now. But throughout that 25 years, I would really often hear people say, this book is my baby, and it's a very good analogy, it's this like precious entity that starts out as just this seed idea, and that lots of love and nurturing and shaping and patience and all of these other things go into, in order to, birth it in the end, And so as I heard, like just generally among friends and beyond, I had heard more and more people when they were pregnant were starting to hire birthing doulas. For those of you that don't know the word, doula, is a doula. So they were hiring doulas as well as midwives. And I guess the difference is, I guess, that the doula is providing a sort of a holistic support and help throughout from whatever point you contact them. It could be it could even be when you want to get pregnant, or it could be when you get pregnant, and it's supporting them throughout that whole journey.
Yes.
So really figuring out how do you, not that you can control all aspects of of pregnancy and birthing, whether of a baby or a book, but it's how would you like this to go, and it's sort of holding space for that and helping along the way, and that's not to undermine obviously the role of a midwife, and
which is like the editor, isn't it?
Yeah, it's what, sorry?
That's like the editor, the midwife.
Yeah, I suppose it's like it's the more I don't know, maybe the more business bit. It's more, it's like
It is. It's the structure that has to happen to keep everything safe, healthy, whatever. But
Exactly, exactly. And it's at a particular point, So
yes,
your manuscript or your pregnancy has to
yes,
be at a certain point quite far along the line
yes,
before an editor or a
yes.
midwife is really
I love
doing their
that.
main thing.
Yeah.
Of course there can be conversations and touch points before that, but actually, I felt that, and I mean also it seemed like a so having seen this idea with pregnancy and having heard people talk about their babies, their books, I sort of thought, oh, a book doula, and I looked it up and I saw that there's just a few people using the term. But actually, when I had come up with it, I don't think there was anyone else in the UK, or I didn't find it. And I have, in my 25 years, I've worked in a lot of areas. It's always been non-fiction I've specialized in. But I became sort of most known in the area of holistic health and wellness and self-development. And so again, the term doula was a fit for that, for those
Yeah.
spheres, because most people, although it wasn't a widely known word, in those spheres, people tended to know what it was. And
Yeah.
so therefore people have liked that idea,
Yeah.
because they know it's about holding that nurturing space. And it kind of, it is a fit with my temperament and the way I work, which is, it's about helping people in a broad sense,
Yeah.
is trying to, well, I'm told this is not me saying this, but is being kind of, warm and friendly and making it approachable and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. So let's get to the help that you offer. Many
absolutely.
many people they want to share their story, but often it can start as a form of self-expression, which is fine. But there is a difference between someone writing for themselves and writing for an audience. So how do you
Absolutely.
start with that kind of question? Who
Yeah.
is this book for?
I mean, it's a brilliant question because it's one of the things that you sort of see the most as a commissioning editor, the things that land on your desk, if they're not well, in the days where they were not as vetted by agents, one of the things you see the most is you can really tell if someone is essentially writing a book for themselves. And so one of the reasons that I really like the idea of doing this doula work is that with that 25 years of experience of seeing all these different manuscripts, is that you, at the very start, you can help people get more clarity
Love
in
it.
terms of, right, why am I writing this book?
Yes.
And it's, there's so many reasons that people write books. And traditionally, I am now helping people to birth their books. I may or may not be helping them in the end to write them. Yes. So I'm helping them, and people come to me at all stages. So people will come with a seed idea and go like, I've got
Yes.
this idea, would this work? Or they'll come to me with 10 ideas
Yeah.
or 3 ideas and go, what should I do? So it's the starting point though for me, whether they come with one idea a lot or whether they're already quite along the way in a particular area. The starting point for me is some kind of conversation or piece of work really around why are you writing this? You know, and that there's lots of layers to that. So part of that is it for yourself or is it for others or is it for both? And then within each of those, there's lots of avenues too, right?
Yes.
So traditionally, I have been helping mostly because of the area in publishing that I was commissioning and editing. I've mostly been helping people who are experts in their area. So whether that be yoga, mindfulness, positive psychology, Buddhism, or whatever else, and or people with a big platform who people want to know more about their lives,
Yes. Yes.
or
So it's a bit of
their
both, isn't it? Yeah.
bit of both, yeah. So, like, traditionally, I've been helping them, and so that is about spreading their teachings or their insights or their expertise. It's about that really, spreading that as widely as possible, and or as a calling card for what they do, right?
Yes. I love
Right.
that. I love that. And
But the
this.
flip side of that is that you know, so when you're doing that stuff, you're always thinking about what are the promises for the reader,
Yes.
like what did they want to know? What are they typing in to find
Yes.
your book, So that's how you're making it. It's points of resonance for the reader.
I love that. And sort of this relates to my next question, which I'm going to kind of blend together.
Sure.
You will have people, like you said, who are going to share their knowledge. There are other people who are sharing about themselves.
Yes.
Either way, is there a type of formal writing style? I know people have individual voices, but is there a type of
Yes.
style that you would encourage, or is it just individual voices okay?
Again, it's so nearly every question along these lines is kind of, it so depends on what
Yeah.
you're writing about,
Yeah, true.
and going back to the question that you asked about, how do you write for others and make sure it
Yeah.
resonates for others? I think something that's really important is um not just I'm writing for others, but who is that
Which
other?
others? Yes, yes, true.
Right? Because just like in a conversation, if you're talking to your granny and you're talking to I don't know, some skateboarder that you want to get info from in the street, it's going to be a really different conversation, even if it's about the same topic, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
so I would say, in terms of the tone that you're trying to find, it depends what your natural tone is. It depends whether you're putting yourself across as an expert or someone who has lived it. There's so many aspects to bring in. So there's
Yes.
certainly no right or wrong tone. There isn't,
But it's
no.
there's a lot of distilling and thinking that has to go into it, which is why a conversation with yourself would be helpful. So I do see
It's
that.
so key, and it's the key thing. I mean, I imagine we'll probably go on to talk about this, but for me, what is key, because I've been a commissioning editor, um, and because I work and have worked in nonfiction, all my career, then what becomes clear, and we'll talk about this more, is in nonfiction, what is really important is what is called the book proposal
Yeah,
document. And basically that is, it's like a pitch,
yeah,
like in the TV world it would be called a pitch. It's a pitch for your book.
yeah.
And to me, that is at the core of everything. And so the reason I mention it now, I'll talk more about
We
it, but
will
the
go on
reason I
to it.
mention
Yeah.
it now is because actually that is where a particular tone is kind of required, right? Because you're trying to, it's really important to get your own voice and your own tone into that. But actually, at the end of the day, that is a sales pitch, because if you're approaching an agent or a publisher, this is a creative endeavor that you're involved in, but it is also a commercial one. Like, if
Yes.
you're approaching an agent or a publisher,
Yeah.
right? And therefore, this is a pitch for a product, and that's really important to remember. So that's where the tone needs to be. And that's not to say it doesn't have to be all like, oh, look at me, sales pitch, sales pitch. Like, for me, I will absolutely be encouraging people to view this as a way to create a really authentic, effective, useful blueprint for what they're going to do for themselves, but that will also work for the agents and publishers.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Which then relates to, we hear so many stories of self-publication that suddenly becomes a massive success, like 50 Shades of Grey, for
Yeah.
example. But is that more about publishers, even though they might have written the structure beautifully, the pitch beautifully, was it just the topic that everyone just went, oh, I don't think I can sell that? Or do you think it was just to do with the voice? Or, can you find what
I mean,
goes
if I
wrong?
knew that, I'd be, I don't know, like, that's like the magic, isn't it? Like, who,
Yeah.
who knows, in a way.
Yeah.
But like, but I think it's a really important discussion to have, because, like, I'll tell you where my mind goes as an editor and commissioning editor. When I hear these stories, my mind always goes, when I read a piece about this or something, I always feel for the editor or commissioning editor,
Yeah.
because I always think, like, oh, people just don't quite get the context. Like, if you're a commissioning editor sitting at a desk, you're very busy, let's say. You're
Yeah.
over, you're overstretched in every way. And it used to be you literally had mountains of
Yeah.
manuscripts piling up. Now they're just piling up in your,
In your
in your
inbox.
screen, right? But you've got so much that you're looking at,
Yeah.
and you've got your own personal preferences, but you've also got all of these, parameters within which you are working, depending on what publisher you're working for, or in some cases, what, an agent, it depends. I'm talking from from book publishing house experience. So there's just so many aspects. It could be that it could be, for example, that you as a publisher are already publishing something that is
similar,
kind of in that vein, within the next publishing cycle, and so, that's a good book, but we've already got this one, and that person doesn't have much of a platform. This one does, or it could be, the tone doesn't hit our thing, or it could be the content's great, but they don't have enough profile for us. I mean, there's a million things, and it's like you're just trying to work with all these parameters. And also, it is not a solo decision as a commissioning editor. If you get things in on your desk, if you like something and you think there's potential that it's a fit and you would like to champion that idea and bring it through, there's a whole process that you need to go through. You distribute it throughout the company. Everyone has to read it. They all give you feedback at acquisition meetings, and they ask questions about it, and they say, well, would that bit, how would that work? Would they be willing to do this? Would they, there's just so many aspects that go on. And then you've got to the financial bit, so then once, if they ask questions, you ask the author, the responses all feel like a fit, then you have to start looking at the financial model of the book. And that's where these days, more and more, the authors, the words I'm going to use that sales use are, platform and profile. And it's just about, often that is online these days, but it doesn't always have to be. It's about how much engagement do people already have with some kind of existing audience who are likely to buy this book.
Yes.
And traditionally, like when I started in publishing 25 years ago and was getting, or I guess 5 years later when I was getting exposure to acquisition meetings, it was much more solely about the idea and to some extent the writing. And what you might notice is, in some ways within non-fiction, it's obviously it's kind of ironic that I'm not talking that much about the writing and the quality of the writing, because in non-fiction, the idea, the content, and the author profile, platform expertise, and all of that, it does take precedence over the writing, because the writing, if you have the expertise and everything, you can line up co-writers and editors and everything to work with people. That's very different from fiction, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of an important, it's an important thing to remember. But yeah, it's the magic of all of those things coming together that will make the difference. And also sometimes people don't, nowadays, a lot of people will just go straight to self-publishing for lots of reasons, rather than going down a traditional publishing route. And again, that comes back to, why am I writing this? What do I want from it?
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. And so insightful. Thank you, Kelly. We are keeping Kelly, and we'll be back and talking about the book proposal.
Navigating today's workplace is tough.
Toxic employees, endless drama, a lack of motivation. We've all been there.
But fear not, we are here to help. My name is Leanne and I'm a chartered psychologist.
My name is Al and I'm a business owner. And together we dig into the scientific and commercial secrets behind great workplace cultures in Truth, Lies and Work.
A no-nonsense, award-winning psychology podcast brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network. We explore practical strategies for building a great workplace.
We debunk buzzwords and bring you the very best advice around finding and keeping great people, from personality tests.
Personality tests they're mostly bollocks. I don't know what kind of language you do on your podcast. I don't know if people know this, but the man who wrote the Wonder Woman comics is the person who invented the disc.
When more flexible working became a norm, you no longer hurt your career prospects by being the one person who worked flexibly.
All the way to avoiding high turnover.
We recruit and promote people to managerial roles based on their technical skills, not their people skills. This is a very fundamental problem we have, which we haven't directly tackled.
From toxic-free cultures,
interventions for the individual are only half the answer. Systemic change is the other half.
To sustainable growth.
Thinking beyond just paying somebody a good salary, I think is super necessary now. We have to offer so much more than that.
We have got you covered.
So join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays, where we help you to simplify the science of work and build amazing workplace cultures.
Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. We are talking with Kelly Thompson. She is a book doula, and what she does is she helps you birth your book from the very small seed idea into creating that proposal, even creating the written subject afterwards. And Kelly, we've been talking a little bit earlier about the book proposal and how that is one of the most important aspects, especially if you're looking at a non-fiction book. Yes. How do you sit down with your authors and start fleshing out an idea? Do you have a model or a structure that you would normally use?
Yes, I mean, I will always tailor things to individuals, but there is a kind of a base model that I'm working around within that. So, because obviously it partially depends on what people are writing about, but also where they are in the process. Yeah, so yes. That has because some people will come to me already having written a manuscript, for example, and then and then in that case you need to figure out what is best use of my time and their time, and do they want to invest in you reading and assessing that first, or do they want to give it a go trying to kind of condense the ideas down into what the vision of the book is, having already written it? But essentially, if you are wanting to put forward a book to an agent or publisher, you need a book proposal document and some sample supporting text. Yeah. And different agents and publishers will have slightly different requirements for that. Yeah. In terms of volume of text that they want with it, and in terms of categories within the proposal and all of that, okay? But what I would tend to do with most people who come to me is I would suggest that they initially book in for what I call a discovery session, and within that we discuss their book, and I get a sense of them, and I get a sense of what they want, and we talk about the why, and yeah, I figure out where they are in the process, and together we figure out then what would the next best steps be. And for me, there are very few, I'm not sure if I've ever had any, I'm saying very few, there's very few incidences where a book proposal document is not helpful. Like, as I already mentioned, because it's your sales pitch for an agent and a publisher, but it's also your complete blueprint for your own writing. It's like an anchor, and a lot of people, especially because traditionally I have worked in that, or specialized, I should say, in the area of holistic health and things, and people go, oh, this is going to be like a rod for my own back, or I like to sort of freestyle it with my writing, or it's channeled, it's like, I really genuinely view it as the opposite of that. I think because it's like an anchor, it gives you freedom to roam and not get lost.
Yes. I love that.
Because it's not set in stone, this proposal document, and just to clarify what this proposal document is, so I talk about it like, one of the other things I considered calling myself when I opted for Book Doula in the end was a book architect. And the idea behind that is that you are looking at what's the structure of this going to be? What does this need to be? Like, what does it need to be for whom? Me, the reader, the agent, the publisher, you're taking in all of this into account. So if you think of that in architecture terms, like if I want to build a house, okay, and I mean, it's a funny thing, isn't it? In theory, people think, oh, well, I can write a book. You don't think, well, I could build a house. You think I'm going to get a team of experts to help me figure out how to build a house, right? So you don't just kind of buy some bricks, see some land, and start popping them down. Like, if I did that, it's not likely to go that well. The bricks are likely to fall down at some point. Whereas if I kind of speak to experts, both architecturally and building wise, then suddenly we go, okay, so what's the land like? What purpose do we want the house to serve? Who is going to live in that house, i.e. who's going to read the book, etc., etc., right? So that's what you're doing with the book proposal. You're building up this picture of, it's a vision. It's kind of like a vision board, that's a useful way to think of it in self-development terms. So I would do a discovery session with initial things, and then figure out, okay, what would the next best steps be? Some authors will feel comfortable to go to just be sent the whole book proposal template and just start working in it.
Yeah.
And if they're comfortable doing that, it's really great, because it means you are just getting your ideas down. And the thing that I will really encourage people to do is like, and I, you know, I have to tell myself this a lot because I have perfectionist tendencies, but is try to let go of that. It doesn't, this is a first draft of your book proposal, just like when you're writing a first draft.
And it can
It's like,
change.
just get the ideas down, you know. So I can't remember who said it, but I read it recently that, you know, often you aren't keen on your own, what you write yourself. And they said, you know, you can edit bad text, you can't edit a blank page.
Yeah,
You know?
I love that. Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
So it's about getting your ideas down, and then they will send them to me, and then we have a springboard from which we can start going, okay, now let's focus on this category.
Yes.
Let's really, like, what do we think the key selling points are? What are the key promises for the reader? You know, who is your target market? And all of that is always interwoven with this why. You know, why am I writing it?
Yes. No, I like that. And I think that is really important because it does help you come back to it all the time, even if you do change it. And one of my books, I started before the pandemic. I finished it after. I changed the whole second half of it with consultation with my editor.
Yes.
Now, this is a new question because it's only come up quite recently.
Yes.
With a non-fiction book, we totally understand, as an expert, you will have to cite your sources, you have to cite the research, all of that's understood.
Yes.
Lived experience, and I'm talking about the SALT path here.
Okay. Yes.
How much of truth has to be truth for lived experience? Because people will perceive things in different ways. So what considerations are there for a non-fiction lived experience book that perhaps that could push it into fiction? Or
it's a great, very timely question, obviously, given all the discussion about that recently. And I think you're so right to say people have different perceptions of things. It doesn't, and I don't know, let me be clear.
No.
Where things go, where things lie in that particular instance, but I think in real life, we've probably all had examples of this kind of thing where two people's perception of the same event is vastly different. And it can seem like one person is lying and the other person is telling the truth. But actually, it's a very fluid thing, you know. Yeah. But I mean, I guess, you know, I think obviously there's sort of legal aspects to make sure that when you're saying things that there's nothing libelous, like you're not claiming anything against other people.
Yes.
You know, and any publishers, commissioning editors will always be looking out for anything that is questionable on that front. You know, if they're actually blaming somebody for something or whatever, you know, if it's not that, then it's like, you know, it's a really interesting question because, again, coming from the inside of publishing, I can't help but feel, because there's then a big debate of, well, how much due diligence do publishers do?
Yes, but how much
I think that's a really interesting question, because how can you do I mean, due diligence, of course, is an important thing to do, right? And in terms of, for example, you know, if you're an expert in an area, that's a different thing. Like, make sure, you know, they've got their qualifications.
Absolutely.
And they know
That's easy.
saying, right?
That's easy.
That's easy. But when it's someone's life, well, how do you do you check that? You know, at the end of the day, my personal, and it is a personal take with no affiliation to anything else, but my personal take on that is that is the author's responsibility. That's their moral sort of responsibility.
Yes.
You know, and that's about their relationships with all the people in those books, if they're true people, you know. So yeah, that would be my take on that. And I mean, it's interesting because when that all kind of kicked off, I have a good friend who absolutely loves that book. I'm seeing her tonight as it happens. And I just sent the link to her. In fact, I met her through editing her book 20 years ago.
Wow.
And it was a yoga book. And my partner of 23 years, it's our anniversary today.
Congratulations.
And we had our first kiss at this author's birthday party. He modeled in her yoga book. So we met through, anyway, I digress. But she loved the Salt Path. And so I just sent a little link going, oh, wow, look at this. You know, it was just that. And I really, she's not in the publishing world, but I really loved her response, because it was just essentially saying, oh, that's a shame, but I still got a lot from it. You know, that's the essence of what she said. You know what I mean? And I think that's that's in a way, that's going back to your initial question, you know, what are you doing for yourself and what are you doing for others? Like, so does it like in terms of a story, it's just about, well, is it nonfiction or is it fiction? It doesn't really matter, because actually the reader can gain a lot from that. But in terms of the impact that that might have on real life people around you, if you've written that, that's a different thing. And I, you know, from my point of view, that's about personal responsibility then, you know.
I think that's a great way of describing it. And I love, because that brings it back to your original point. Who are you writing this for? What are they going to see from it? Who's your audience? And I think that's fantastic.
And also some people, you know, and they often are. I mean, I work with people, for example, who want to birth their, or give voice to, I should say, their trauma stories and healing, you know. And so there's quite often conversations about, you know, how much they do and don't want to say. Do they use real names or not?
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, actually, because we do need to go to a break. But that is actually the next question about when it's about trauma and what effect that can have on other people as well. So we'll keeping you, Kelly, and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to Mental Health Matters Office Hours. We're having a fabulous conversation with Kelly Thompson. She is a book doula, but I love your energy, Kelly. It's so nice.
Thanks, Audrey.
A book doula is somebody who helps you birth your book. It's somebody who helps you create and shape and nurture that idea, whether it becomes then just the proposal, which you then send to an editor, or the finished manuscript. And Kelly has got so much experience in publishing, and it's just been such an insightful conversation. So if you've just tuned in, please do go back and listen to it, because if you want to write a non-fiction book, this is one of the women to listen to. Kelly, we just started before the break talking about if somebody is sharing a lived experience of trauma, and there's a couple of things there. The first is, how much do you want to say about yourself, and how much, I guess, when people read it, do you want to be known as that's the girl who did this, or that's the man who this happened to? But then there's also the flip side of, for the reader, the secondary trauma, the trigger warning, the content warnings, that there's safeguards that need to be put into place as well. So do you mind telling us a little bit more about how you might need to approach when you're talking about something very traumatic and very personal?
Yeah, of course. So I think there's a few things. Like, one is from the point of view of when someone's coming to me with an idea like that, you know, I mean, I'm not a therapist, you know, but because I've worked with people who are writing about that area in one shape or another for a really long time, part of the role is very much holding a space for that and really listening. And I think, you know, one of the most important things in a relationship like that is trust, you know, and it's, you know, that's definitely a big part of the sort of the doula brand, is that idea of, you know, what you say here it's a safe space, you know, and not everything you say here necessarily needs to go into the book, you know. You know, but the most effective books are the ones where you are willing to be vulnerable and really get to the heart of the matter, you know, and I think people can sniff out if you're missing stuff, you know, and I think that's really interesting. I know that you know, often someone will send me a piece of writing and it could be fabulous, but I'll go, what's going on there? You know, like, and they'll go, oh, I didn't want to say this, and I put it in, I've taken it out, and then I thought I'll do that, you know, and so often, and actually often, I mean, it is important as an author and a writer that you, again, depending on your why, you know, who's this going to, you know, so because it is an exposing thing to write about this kind of stuff. And if it's actually going out, being published and going wider than the people you know, then that can be very vulnerable. So you need to know your own boundaries and what you're comfortable to share. But if you're working with someone like me, it's a good way to gauge, okay, I'm going to share it with you and I'm going to see how that lands and I'm going to see what we could do with it. Can we weave that in comfortably? And if we can, great. Or maybe your body goes, no, actually, that's a step too far, you know. And I mean, I worked with a beautiful woman years ago on a book, and it was all about being sort of bold and brave, and you know, and she is that, she embodies that, and she was. Everything she had in it was that, but there was something else beneath, you know, and it just took one session when we had this breakthrough that cracked open the energy that needed to ripple through to just elevate and make it all land in a slightly different way, you know. So it's really, really interesting. And then going to your point about the secondary trauma of people reading it, I think it's a brilliant, very insightful question. You know, sometimes people sort of dive in because they nearly want to have a not shock factor, but you know, they want to get people's attention, you know, and which I understand, but which I mean, and if you're, again, depending on why you're writing it, if you're writing it for your own purposes and it's not going to be widely published and stuff, if that's the route you want to go, of course, nothing's right or wrong, you know, but if you're going down a more traditional publishing route, generally there will be some sort of setting the context for people, you know, and potentially even, I mean, I'm personally a big fan of kind of some sort of personal introduction, you know, and because it builds trust when you're sort of giving, in some respects, you're speaking to the why that why am I buying your book? Yeah, you know, and I think there's something to be said. People say, if we're chatting and having a session, people will often say, but I wouldn't know what to say about that because, and then they say exactly what I think is good to put in the book, is that sort of being really honest in a very self-conscious way, saying, you know, I really struggled with whether or not, you know, how far to go with this, or because I think that sort of nearly behind the scenes insight into writing, I think people are hungry for that, for people, you know, to not just be the, oh, well, here's what happened, here's the story, but actually like, well, this has been like an epic thing. And going back to the birthing thing, you know, the other reason that calling myself a book doula seemed appropriate. I don't ever want to say this at the very start because it can be off-putting, but you know, it's a painful process birthing something, you know, and actually it's quite a long, arduous process. The idea of seeding and nurturing and shaping and writing and tweaking and editing and letting someone else get involved to do that, you know, before you birth it, you know, so there is actually, it's a painful process, but people forget the pain afterwards, you know, that is relevant, you know, and they do get to a point. It's like, if we want to go back to the house analogy, you know, the architecture and the building a house, it's like renovations, you know what I mean? It all gets worse before it gets better. Yes. You know, so I think there is that aspect, and part of that mess in the middle, I think it's really helpful to do sort of idea dumps, you know, in terms of like, for example, even to do with something like, okay, we feel like we need to set context about this trauma. So let's just do an idea dump about how we can do that. And then something just shines out, that will work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea. And just in terms of an overall summary, can you give us sort of 3 key things that not necessarily makes a book sell, but makes you connect with a book?
Sure. That makes me, well, I mean, I suppose there's a few different things here that, like, it depends who the you is, because I think that makes a reader connect with a book.
Okay, let's go with
different from makes me connect with a book or makes a publisher connect with a book, because we're all coming at it from slightly different reasons. But so what I'd say is, well, I'll answer it in 2 ways. So for me, in terms of who I would be working with and what make me, it's more to do with, like, I genuinely just want, and I at the start, when I started working as a book doula on a freelance basis, was very much in the thinking that I had been within publishing houses. So I was thinking, well, I help people to formulate these book proposals and create something that is commercially viable. And I still do that. And I work with agents who say to me, look, I've got this great author. They've got a platform and a profile and they're a lovely writer, or they've got brilliant background, but I don't have time to work with them on the proposal to shape it, and so the proposal is getting rejected, and here's some feedback we've had from different publishers, here's what I think, talk to the author, So I start the process, and then we kind of figure out, okay, here's where it fits, here's what feels comfortable with you, and then as I started to do this for people, they got, each one of them, it went back to the agent and they got book deals. And it was like, oh, this is nice. This is, okay, right, yeah, and it started clocking with me. And so it's just such a lovely process. And it's what I already was doing as a commissioning editor. But to do that as a freelancer and provide people with that help so that they don't feel they have to do it all alone, is it's a wonderful thing. But what I then realized as I went along, because I had moved out of London, I'd moved down to the South Coast, I was meeting a lot of people who are more in like the creative arts, so like photographers and people who, like musicians, people who wanted to write like braided memoirs or sometimes part fiction, like a whole mix of different things. And at the start, my imposter syndrome was like, well, I only help people in this area. And, and then I was like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. I can absolutely help people on a broader level. And so for me, it's just about connecting with, it's authentic stories and that are or insights that are about connection, and where authors have an ability to do exactly what you said in your first question, that even if they're writing for themselves, unless this really is just more like a journaling exercise or a legacy piece for their family, that they have an ability to make it something bigger, that a personal story has an ability to become a universal story.
Nice.
But just to answer it on a second level, in a more bullet form way, I would say in terms of like, if you're writing to an agent or a publisher with your idea, and we haven't talked much about content, the proposal document, obviously the actual content and the structure and what is actually going to be in your book, that is obviously at the end of the day key, and then the synopsis that comes from that and everything, right? But just in terms of simple things to look for, once you've got that in terms of getting your book noticed by an agent and a publisher, they seem very basic, but I think they're really important to say. So firstly, I would say, make sure you're approaching the right people,
True. Yeah.
If an agent or a publisher, despite the fact you like them, say, we aren't accepting memoirs or
don't
whatever
send
it is,
them a memoir.
don't send them it. So that's very basic. Another one I would say is, and it's really important, because what you've got to remember is publishers, commissioning editors, agents, like I say, they're inundated with stuff. So provide them with what they have asked for. They will say a cover letter of this length, a book proposal with these categories, in this font with this line spacing. There's reasons that they ask for that. It's not random, same thing, amount of sample text. If they ask for particular things that you haven't thought of before, make sure you do it, and make sure you're gauging it all through the lens of what that specific agent and publisher create. Make sure you have a knowledge, just like if you were going for a job interview, you wouldn't go for an interview just because you like the role. You have to know something about the company, right? And then the third point I would say is, of course, content is really important. Remember that so is your platform and profile, or your ability to your willingness, not ability, your willingness to build that. So even if you don't have one, if you're able to say, look, I currently don't engage with this, but I'm really happy to, I'd love to do this kind of thing. And that doesn't also show, it shows capacity to grow, but it also shows a lot about your character, which is really important.
Absolutely,
and that's what I would end on, is remember that these people don't know you, right? So you are not just creating a proposal and sample text that lets them get to know your book, but also that lets them get to know you. and so you really make sure that you're this open, flexible, but also, you're an open, flexible person, but with a vision of how you view this to work, So I here's how I view it, but I'm also like, let's discuss this because you're experts,
I love that. Oh, Kelly, it's been so great and so insightful talking to you. Where can we find you? What's your website?
Yeah, as per what we've been talking, my website is Book Doula, so doula.co.uk, and I will be growing and putting more information on there. I'll just finish by saying I've touched on it a little bit, but I'm sort of widening what I offer. So as well as these kind of editorial consultancy, book doula services, I'm also doing more talks and workshops and events of different kinds. So I'm starting to run, but what holds them all together is like this idea of like holding space and encouraging people to share their stories, because there's just such power in sharing our stories. So there's nostalgia nights, there's other stories where people share stories from their own lives. I'm going to be running a workshop at a grief festival coming up, which I'm doing a workshop on writing to remember. So going back again to this why, I'm starting to widening out, not just doing the commercial book proposal stuff, but also writing for catharsis and healing and legacy and remembering and all those important things.
Amazing.
So bookdoula.co.uk. Drop me a line.
Perfect. We will have those details in the show notes. Kelly, thank you so much. It's been brilliant
Audrey.
chatting with
It's
you.
always a pleasure to talk to you. You're so great.
Thank you. We are heading over to Business Boost. Where do we start when it comes to getting your ideas down? Well, there's some really good tips from the Books and Such website. They suggest the following. They say, don't talk in big theme ideas. Don't just say, oh, my book's only about leadership and well-being. Well, okay, and what does that include? What is the niche aspect? Why do I want to buy it? So break down what your specialism is. They also say, do start with the distinctive. So what are you going to gain by the end of it? So on my book, The Leader's Guide to Wellbeing, what I say is it's a practical toolkit to keep high-performance teams energized, valued, motivated, and engaged. So it's very clear that it's practical. It gives you exercises that you can do within your teams, and it is for teams. So it's clear what that book is going to be about. The next thing they say is don't bog down in the minutiae. So don't start giving 50 different definitions for whatever topic you're covering, because people will get a bit bored. The only time you would do that, and I have to say I did do that with my book, Leader's Guide to Resilience, is if there is debate over what that definition should be. And when I was talking about resilience, everybody had been writing books about it being bouncing back. That was not what my book was about. Don't talk about what you've written and achieved on completely different subjects. You may, like I have an artistic aspect or string to my bow. I run an arts charity. I teach dance. No one wants to know that when it comes to a book on leadership dynamics. So stick to the point and keep your experience to the point. But do talk about how you are the go-to person for this particular thing. So this is where your experience in the field, whether it's through management, leadership, talking about it, consultancy, whatever it is, that's where you talk about your experience. Also, don't get stuck on the content as in, I'm now going to take you through a whole history of whatever that subject is. Again, maybe if you have to, if it's relevant to the point you're making, then it could be something you could put in the introduction or the foreword or something like that. But it's not what people buy a book for, at least in the business world. And then finally, do cover the features, the key features in it, which gives your publisher and your agent or whoever's trying to sell the book a little bit of an idea of how to pitch it to other people. So talk about how you've structured the book, talk about the unique selling points of the book, talk about some of the key subjects that you cover. So those are just some of those tips. They're from the Books and Such website. Have a think about those. And I know it's really hard because editing your own work, especially when it's something that you care a lot about, begins to feel like you're throwing out something you absolutely love and have just poured your whole heart and soul into. But whilst that's great for you, it may not be great for the reader. So do be brutal with yourself, and good luck with your book. Wow, what a fabulous conversation with Kelly. And if you are thinking about writing a book and you need some support, give her a call and have that discovery conversation. One thing I would always say to remember, however, I've written 4 books, and actually my very first experience writing, they wanted me, not my book. So again, when Kelly talks about showing willing, showing that you'll grow your platform, I didn't have a website at that point. I had to create a website for myself, and it was through the book. And so showing willing, showing that you're somebody that they can work with, that can make a huge difference if you are doing it for a commercial end. So if you want to work with a publishing house, you need to have that flexibility, that ability to grow, that willingness, and that initiative as well. Those are the things to remember. However, I think it's also important to recognize that every book is going to be it's seen by individual people, and that includes publishing houses who have a certain mindset. And it might be that you are the perfect package, you're just at the wrong address. So if you know you've got a good idea and you want to keep pushing with it, try lots of different people, but make sure you also follow the instructions. If they're not accepting unsolicited manuscripts, don't send one in. But as I say, you could be the perfect package, wrong address, try a new address. And from me and the team at Mental Health Matters Office Hours, have a healthy week.